So our next section that we'll cover is a deep dive into the recommended TCFD disclosures relating to risk management and metrics and targets. So for each of these recommendations, we'll consider firstly what investors want to see, what the particular disclosure recommendations are, and then some good practice examples. So starting with risk management, this core element relates to the organization's approach to identifying, assessing, and managing climate-related risk. So really, investors want to know here what those processes are that your organization is using and how you're really then seeing this influence your business strategy and financial planning. So this is important to investors because they need to be able to understand the impacts of climate risk on a company's business model and to then think of how a business can adapt to take advantage of climate-related opportunities and manage those risks that it's identified. So the first disclosure recommendation that TCFD set out here is to describe the organization's processes for identifying and assessing climate-related risks. So some of the disclosure aspects that you'd want to think about under this recommendation include thinking about how do you determine the relative significance of climate risk as compared to other risks within your risk process. Do you think about existing and emerging regulatory requirements, for example? And how do you think about that then impacting your organization in the long term? Also, if you use any kind of risk frameworks or classification approaches to inform your risk process and climate thinking, it's important to disclose those as well so that your investors can understand which of these you're using. The second recommended disclosure here is around the process for managing climate-related risks. So this is after you've identified them and thinking about what the management approach is that you'll take for these risks. So here's some of the helpful information to include is what is the decision that your organization's made in terms of this risk? Will it be mitigated, transferred, accepted, or controlled? How have you prioritized these climate risks within your processes? And how have you decided which ones are material to your business under the criteria that you use to assess materiality? And the final aspect under the risk management section is around how you integrate this understanding of climate risk into your organization's overall risk management approach. So here, the TCFD is really looking to see that you have this integration in place. Whether you might have some aspects that are specific to climate change in your risk process, it's really important that these feed through to your organization's overall understanding of risk. So some of the things that you might want to consider disclosing is clarifying specifically whether climate is seen as an overall business risk and thinking about what the materiality is of climate for your organization. And so an example of good practice here is the company Glencore that works in commodities and mining. So in their disclosure, Glencore demonstrate how the risk process sits across the organization with a connection to the climate process in particular. And then what's really helpful to see is that they put in place specific mitigation measures for different risks within their reporting. So you'll see here that they identify a regulatory risk relating to climate change and carbon pricing, and they've identified the particular mitigation measures that they're taking. This provides really valuable transparency on the specific approach that they're taking to tackle these wider climate change issues. And so the second aspect and the final of the core elements for today is the metrics and targets under TCFD. And so this is really thinking then about those climate risks and opportunities that you've identified and reported on, and how you're really ensuring that you make progress in addressing these. And so again, investors are wanting to see the connection here between those metrics and targets and your wider strategy and business model, and also that they really want to understand in the long term what your performance trends are and how you're really doing over the long term to address these progress areas. So the first aspect under metrics and targets that the TCFD asks organizations to disclose is the metrics that they use to assess climate-related risks and opportunities in line with their strategy and risk management process. So here you really need to think about what those performance metrics are that you can put in place to assess the climate risks and opportunities that you've identified for your business. So for example, if you've identified opportunities to grow your products and services around low carbon services and technology, you'll need to think about how you could report on your revenue from these products and what capital you're investing to realize this opportunity. And a final aspect that you might want to consider is the use of internal carbon pricing. This can be a really valuable tool for businesses to assess potential future regulatory impacts from carbon taxation. So if you're using carbon pricing within your business, this is a very helpful thing to disclose to your investors. The other aspect of metrics and targets that's very key is around the disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions, using the Scope 1, 2, and if appropriate, Scope 3 categories set out in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So here it's great to see these different types of emissions broken down into their relevant reporting scopes. And also, it's great if possible that you disclose the Scope 3 emissions that you see from your value chain, as these are a really important part of both your business's overall impact, but also the potential risks that it could be exposed to as well. Where possible, it's good to include the methodologies that you've used to calculate your emissions, to understand how any estimations have been made, and to see if there are any data gaps which you're looking to address in the future. And the final aspect under metrics and targets is regarding targets and how you're using climate-related targets to understand and manage those risks and opportunities. So here you want to think about saying where you have put in place performance measures, do you have a specific target that's quantified over the long term to achieve that goal? And are there interim targets that you might have in place in the shorter term as well? So again, this is where you could be thinking about aspects such as setting targets on reducing your greenhouse gas emissions in line with a science-based trajectory. You could think about setting targets for growing your revenue from low carbon products and services, and other such aspects here. And so a final case study that I wanted to share with you for the metrics and targets section is from the company Adani Ports. And so they provide a really helpful disclosure in their reporting of their greenhouse gas emissions. On the left-hand side, we have a graph that breaks out their Scope 1 and 2 emissions over time, and it provides several years of prior data to help you understand performance trends over time. Additionally, the intensity of emissions is shown as a line on the graph, and that helps to understand then how well the business is performing relative to its revenue growth over that time. And finally, on the right-hand side, they also include a very helpful breakdown of their Scope 3 emissions, which really helps to show where the different aspects of their value chain have significant impacts on their overall carbon footprint and what this is looking like over time as well. And a final aspect we wanted to share to close off this section is really to encourage you to provide as much disclosure on this journey towards implementing the recommended disclosures as you can. A helpful example to consider here would be that of the real estate firm Lendlease. Within their TCFD reporting, they provide transparency each year over the different recommended TCFD disclosures and what their progress has been in implementing these. They also then include aspects that they're looking at for future to address. So I think an important aspect to highlight here is that it's really valuable to communicate that roadmap and have a clear plan in place that helps to show your investors that where you have gaps in your TCFD reporting, you're taking steps over time to address these. And so to close out this section, a final quick quiz for you. Which would be a good approach to take if you have gaps in your reporting against the TCFD recommendations? So should you publish the information you have for now and communicate a plan to improve in future? Should you omit the information and hope you don't get asked about it? Should you explain why this information is not currently provided? Or could you not disclose anything until you've addressed all of these gaps? There could be several right answers here. And so here are the correct answers. So as we've said, it's really important that you should publish the information that you have now and communicate that plan to address it in future. And there where you have any gaps as well, you can do what's recommended under number 3 and explain why this information isn't currently provided. But what's really important is not to do the 2 or 4 options and avoid disclosure altogether. And we'll go into some further detail in a future segment on why this isn't a good idea.